My wife died 3 years ago. I don't use the word death abstractly. I was in that room until the monitor's silence settled in like a sentence. I felt her hand grow cool in mine. I heard the metallic tone of the doctor's instructions, and fixed in my memory the image of her face lit by a light that held no tenderness. I signed papers that trade life for bureaucracy, chose the flowers because she always said ceremonies shouldn't be too dark, greeted people who seemed to want consolation and curiosity in the same breath, and I was the one who closed the casket when, out of habit or protocol, the staff stepped forward. I went home with a hollow body and a house emptier than anything I had imagined. There was a faint trace of her on the pillow that I left untouched for days. A dry perfume, the light aroma of coffee that insisted on lingering in the kitchen, small signs the routine had left behind like crumbs. The living room felt empty of sound, not just from the absence of her voice, but from the lack of the rotation of small gestures. The mug always placed on the left side, papers arranged by color, the office chair tilted the same way when someone stands up without hurry. All of that was what remained of an arrangement that, before that emptiness, I had thought unchangeable. 3 years later, on an ordinary Thursday, I stopped at a roadside gas station just to stretch my legs and buy water. It was late. The station's light was white and dry, the kind of lighting that flatters no one. A silver sedan pulled in beside me, and for a second, the world bent in a strange curve, back to what once was. When the woman stepped out of the car, my whole body remembered. The habit of closing the door with her hip, the automatic way of adjusting her hair with her left hand, the small scar on her left eyebrow she'd had since childhood. Details no one memorizes unless they've seen them 1,000 times. Inside me came disbelief first, then the need to explain it away. Resemblance, unknown twin, another hallucination born of longing. But there was no room to rationalize when our eyes met. She looked at me and recognized me, not with astonishment, not with surprise, with calculation, with the same calm of someone checking a document and returning to the task. I froze. She smiled, something small, almost mechanical, and kept pumping gas. She said nothing to me. She didn't run. She didn't beg. She didn't ask me to leave it alone. She simply was what she was. Someone performing a practical movement, dressed in routine, who could very well have been a stranger if memory weren't driving the truth into me. Before anything else, you need to understand what her daily life was like. Helena wasn't just organized. She was someone who turned organization into a way of living. She woke at 6:15 with the punctuality of a bell, made coffee without sugar, read economic reports on her tablet, while I tried to find my rhythm for the day. She had a fondness for lists, tasks, investments, contacts, things I considered small. Do you know where key X is? Were handled with a precision that accustomed me to the feeling of a straight road. She was a financial consultant. She used to say most serious problems came from improvisation, not bad luck. I heard her say that so many times I started to believe it. Our Sundays were predictable, our setbacks discussed rationally, our domestic joys small and genuine. Dinner at 8, an old movie on Sundays, exchanging recipes and critiques of cafes around town. When the cancer appeared, it was as if something intensely technical had entered our lives. Tests, appeals, interpreted signs. In March came the diagnosis. In April, treatment. In July, metastasis. Everything so fast that on the calendar life seemed to skip chapters. I once saw as strength the detail with which she organized every final step. She left passwords, financial instructions, a letter with practical wishes. At the time, I thought it noble. Now, after what I saw at that gas station, that care feels more like preparation for a deliberate transition. After the burial, the house was left with a void that slowly turned into habit. Books remained without bookmarks. A mug in the dish rack was used months later without me even noticing. I donated clothes to a charity and kept only a few things. The watch she wore, a box of photographs, the notebook where she wrote down passwords and meeting details. I learned to say I'm fine without my voice trembling. I convinced friends I was at peace. But there was an internal crack, a doubt I pushed aside with busyness until it surfaced in the most trivial setting. The gas station, the light, the silver sedan. When I saw her, I didn't react with courage. I'm still ashamed of that. I stood there, trying to assemble an explanation that would satisfy my reason, not my heart. The next day, I opened the box of photographs. I compared angles, the lines of her smile, the way she held a mug. I went to the cemetery and touched the headstone, as if searching for the friction of truth. Helena Duarte, 1983 to 2022. The letters gave me only dates, no answers. The sign that something might be wrong wasn't an explosive revelation. It was a subtle scratch. In the medical record I reviewed late one night, there was a repeated date in a nursing note. A medication time duplicated on 2 different days at the exact same hour. A small thing, maybe a typing error. But when 2 entries repeat the same pattern, coincidence begins to cast a shadow. I didn't want to turn that into an accusation. Instead, I called the family lawyer just to ask, as if it were merely administrative, whether there was any procedure in case of doubt. The lawyer's voice was calm and advised caution. Be careful before exposing anything. If you have doubts, gather facts. Don't act on impulse. He advised me to evaluate first. I thought about requesting an exhumation, felt my stomach tighten, and stopped. The fear of discovering something irreversible froze me. What if I was wrong? What if I triggered an investigation only to realize it was just longing? I called the lawyer and scheduled a meeting to talk calmly. No one was drawing conclusions, just a man standing in front of a headstone with his head full of questions. In the days that followed, doubt began taking shapes that felt dangerous. I searched grief and hallucination, how to distinguish longing from visual hallucination, and read forums where people described seeing deceased loved ones in everyday places. Part of what I felt could have been that. A factory of desire, inventing faces to fill voids. Other parts, however, didn't fit. Discreet bank transfers in the years before her death. A storage unit rented months earlier that I had never known about. I filed no reports. I simply recorded. I found statements where small amounts left her accounts for a corporate account opened shortly before everything accelerated. Modest sums, almost designed not to draw attention. There was no context, no reference to the company beyond the name on the statement. I didn't start chasing companies. I didn't want to turn her life into a public case. I just felt the weight of that discovery, as if someone had hidden a suitcase under the bed. I went to the storage unit listed in a contract and found the padlock replaced. Among empty boxes, I found a passport issued shortly before the death, under another name, an envelope with money, and a folder containing medical reports with slightly different terminology. There were no grand revelations, just organization and cleanliness, as if the plan required no theatrics, only logic. That left me with more questions than answers. Who had requested that passport? Why was the money stored there? Could the exam have been under another name for some administrative protocol? I avoided calling public investigators. I held back my curiosity with one hand and restrained myself with the other. 3 days later, I returned to the gas station. It was like revisiting the scene of a crime you think you can solve alone. The sedan pulled in, and I stepped out of my car. I said her name. Helena stopped, turned, looked at me. The silence between us lasted far longer than speech would allow. She denied it in a voice I knew, said I was mistaken. I asked for an explanation. She took a deep breath as if choosing the shortest path, telling me to leave. There was no drama, just a soft command, wrapped in the desire to avoid consequences. In the rearview mirror, I saw her expression. Not fear, not guilt, a calm that pulled the ground from beneath me. When the car drove away, I stood there with my face wet, not knowing whether from imagined rain or from my own jaw trembling. After that, I began to recall small remarks that, years earlier, I had filed away as just her way. Comments at a dinner. Sometimes I think I'd start over. We laughed, both of us, because it sounded like a daydream. Little jabs about people who changed lives as easily as clothes. Jokes about voluntary disappearance. At times, she seemed to test responses. She would ask how I'd react if she vanished, and I answered confidently, thinking it was only a hypothesis. Now I see those tests as chess pieces moved by a mind evaluating the board. One night, an unknown number rang my phone. I answered quickly and was met with silence on the other end. Breathing for a few seconds, no words, and then the line went dead. I often received robocalls, automated surveys, but that pause, filled with human air, unsettled me more than the image of the sedan. There was no confirmation it was her, no explicit threat, just a warning. Someone was paying attention to what I was doing, and that silent attention made me retreat. I didn't call back. I didn't want to seem invasive. I called the lawyer again just to say I wanted to think before taking any action. He advised me to document everything without rushing. You need to be certain of what you're saying so it doesn't sound fantastical. Keep evidence, dates, witnesses, and only then expose anything. I listened and agreed. His voice steadied me. In the days that followed, I maintained an almost ritualistic routine, revisiting photos, copying files to a drive, printing statements, noting dates. I went through emails and found computer searches for how to change your name, international passport requirements, initial research dating back months before the diagnosis. There were no grand theories in my file, just traces of preparation, small, patient signs that added up to the feeling that I might have been the last person entitled to the truth. I began watching similar-looking people on the street with a discomfort that felt ridiculous. The risk of seeing Helena in every woman who crossed the sidewalk. It turned me into a man with tired eyes, more attentive to hair and scars than to the work in front of me. I lost focus at times. Colleagues noticed I was different. A friend invited me to talk and gently said the mind can play tricks when absence is too large. Find someone to talk to, he suggested. Don't go into this alone. I shyly agreed and scheduled an appointment with a therapist to put into words what felt like it was slipping into its own logic. There was, however, one piece I couldn't bear to leave untouched. The address written in the small black notebook found in the unit. A string of numbers that looked like coordinates. A name reduced to initials. A neighborhood outside the city with similar houses. I drove there one cold morning, parked, and watched the automatic gate from a distance. I saw a similar car, same color and model, and felt the impact return. I stayed in the car. I watched without the courage to get out. I didn't ring the bell. bell. I didn't call out. I left without seeing a face. Maybe it was cowardice. Maybe it was prudence. I left with the sense that confirming it would activate something I couldn't control. I preferred to keep the record of possibility, not the certainty that would push me toward irrational acts. At the end of that day, I sat in the kitchen, the same one that had heard laughter, complaints about dinners, and carefree plans. I drank coffee and ran my hand over the watch I kept, that small object that still carries a faint trace of her perfume. I thought about checking the life insurance. I remembered there was a policy I had never reviewed in detail, and decided to leave it for later, for another episode, because there were threads I didn't want to pull without a strong line. Not because I didn't want to know, but because I realized moving too fast might mean running over my own sanity. I chose to act as if I were assembling a puzzle. Each piece matters, but forcing them together can break everything. What corrodes me is the uncertainty, this cruel doubt that drains more energy than any bitter certainty. I don't know whether I witnessed something real, or whether my mind, eager to close wounds, created an image that fits a need for explanation. I don't know if I was manipulated by a woman who planned everything masterfully, or if life is playing a trick only I can see. I don't know whether I should confront her, accept that some questions have no answers for now, or accept a life with this crack left open as something that will define me from this day forward. And I confess, part of me is afraid to discover that the answer will reveal more than I can bear. I end this chapter without making accusations, without filing lawsuits, without turning her absence into a public story. I gathered my notes, scheduled the therapy session,